Let's turn to Mark Littlewood, the Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, who knows Liz Truss fairly well. Not only has he, of course, worked with her in policy terms, directing the Institute of Economic Affairs for the last decade or so, but also, Mark Littlewood, you were at university with Liz Truss. What did you make of her then? And has she changed in her attitude to politics now?
Well, Tom, I was about to say she hasn't changed, but I think I would have to credit her with being older and wiser than when I met her nearly 30 years ago at Oxford University. But I think her basic approach as a personality hasn't changed. She's a very direct and outspoken woman. I know sometimes people say her media appearances aren't quite as polished or as slick as they might be, but certainly in face-to-face conversations, she leaves you in no doubt about where she stands on an idea, a policy issue, or even an individual. It's you always walk away knowing what Liz Truss thinks. That was true way back in the 1990s at Oxford University and is even truer today. And I think that's an important trait in a politician, and certainly in a Prime Minister, and even more so when the country's in a time of crisis. I also argue, Tom, that I don't think she's changed her views as much as some people would like to pretend. Yes, on the face of it, she's gone from Liberal Democrat to Conservative. She was in the Liberal Democrats when I first met her. She was, of course, for Remain at the time of the 2016 referendum, and now seems to be a born-again Brexiteer. She, of course, infamously gave a speech against the monarchy when she was in the Liberal Democrats, and I believe now is a constitutional monarchist. So you can find policy positions that have changed, for sure, over the last 30 years. But actually her philosophy has been pretty consistent. She's in favour of individual liberty, open markets, free enterprise, is suspicious of a big state, doesn't think that big government programmes and heavy-handed regulation are the way to move the country forward. And I think she thinks that probably even more strongly today than she did when I met her nearly 30 years ago, but she had all of those instincts then too.
Now, what do those instincts mean in policy terms? Of course, we can all see that Liz Truss has been speaking in terms of a smaller state, in terms of freer markets with a broad brush. But when it comes to specifics, what will that mean? Because, of course, we are expecting an enormous amount of government intervention coming as soon as tomorrow, an enormous amount of spending to keep energy bills low.
Yeah, Tom, it's a very good point, because I think oftentimes from the last three Conservative Prime Ministers, Boris Johnson, Theresa May and David Cameron, we heard each of them basically saying, I'm in favour of free markets, but, and then immediately after the but came a whole list of state spending programmes and interventions. I think that Liz Truss is a rather more grounded and committed supporter of free markets, but I do await the energy announcements with some degree of trepidation. There would be an irony if we actually get a sort of free market enterprise, pro-enterprise government, and its first big move is a huge intervention in the energy market. But let's see the details. If it is a huge intervention, I hope it's a short-term one if there's any price fixing going on. And to kind of give the new government some credit, the energy market is so broken at the moment. It's been so rigged and interfered with now for about 20 years that it would be quite difficult just to click your fingers and move to a proper liberalised energy market. But I would hope the government want to get us there in due course. They might just need to buy some time. More generally, if I was to be a bit more optimistic and put aside my trepidation about what we might hear about the energy package, she actually said as her opening gambit on the streets, on the podium at number 10 Downing Street, Tom, you would have heard her yesterday, her first commitment was to free markets and lower taxes. And we might not hear the details of that in the next 24, 48 hours, but we will do at the emergency budget in perhaps 2 weeks' time. And I'm keeping a beady eye on that. I think that will really tell us how radical this government's going to be. Will we see not just the reverse in national insurance rises that Rishi Sunak put up and a reverse of the corporation tax rise? We know we're going to get those, but are we going to get something a bit meatier than that? Perhaps a reduction in VAT, for example, perhaps a reduction in business rates, I'm speculating. But I think that will really tell us how committed to tax cutting and free markets and enterprise this government is. And I'm looking forward to that emergency budget, perhaps with a bit more optimism than tomorrow's announcement on energy policy.